talks on fertilizers, rare earths, and tunnel boring machines in the context of the current diplomatic outreach?
There are two contexts in which we should see this. The first is the bilateral context, which is one in which China had created disturbance in the border areas. And while there has been some form of disengagement, we still have not returned to status quo ante on the boundary issue. And there is need for demobilization of the additional troops. But along with this, there was a range of economic sanctions that had come about. We were looking at their investments, bilateral visa flows had been restricted. They had stopped our Kailash Mansarovar Yatra. Many of these issues had been resolved. There was a second strand of issues that came up recently, which was the issues related to the Trump tariff and the kind of protectionist measures. And what we saw was that China was trying some of these economic sanctions against a range of countries, including India. And so if you look at what was happening with fertilizers or EVs or with rare earths or, the tunnel bore machines, these are actually forms of economic sanctions levied by the Chinese on India and various other countries. I do not support economic sanctions, and particularly for countries that can be very strong, cooperative, have a cooperative mechanism. This is not the desirable way to go ahead. We should actually have had discussions on this. It is good that Wang Yi has come with this particular package of wanting to consider the lifting of these particular sanctions on India. But this should not have been done in the first place.
Right, sir. So what could this mean for the next phase of India-China trade talks and economic cooperations, particularly in strategic sectors?
Right. I think India and China have huge potential to be economic partners and not competitors only. There will, of course, be certain areas in which we will have competition in the economic sphere, but I think our partnership potential is very great. And for that, what we need is a very high level of trust and interdependency that can be built in which both sides actually end up winning. And also there has to be consideration for each other's domestic market considerations. And so when we have these particular talks that come up for the trade and investment issues, I hope that these will be taken into consideration so that we look at actually what are win-win solutions. If we look at the bilateral trade today, the Chinese market is still largely closed to Indian exports, as a result of which we have a very high level of trade deficit with China. And so this is something that needs to be corrected. China needs to put in a special effort to stop the technical barriers to trade that it has, be more open and accessible to our products so that we can have a more balanced trade which benefits both sides. And finally, I think we can actually collaborate when we look at various regional and global issues, particularly in the context of building up strong, reliable, and resilient supply chains. And we can actually collaborate in this. We already have a system in which a number of intermediate products between India and China go back and forth and help each other's economies. Those need to be strengthened much further. And the areas in which India has strong competencies should be provided access to the Chinese market.
Certainly, sir. So with PM Modi likely to attend the SCO Summit in China, how significant is the timing of this relaxation? And does it signal a strategic recalibration by Beijing?
I do not see this as a strategic recalibration. I see this as something that China should have done a long time ago. In fact, China should not have imposed these economic sanctions on what can potentially be a great partner of China. China has a large economy. India is the fastest growing major economy today, and there is a lot that we can collaborate on. I understand there is a possibility that Prime Minister Modi will be attending the SCO Summit in Tianjin in China. And that would be an occasion where there can be further exchanges if that visit does take place, and there is a bilateral meeting with the Chinese president. But I don't think we should look at it in terms of any strategic recalibration, because the Chinese objective has been to deny access to India on various fronts, to create problems on the border, and we need to stay engaged. I strongly believe that we should not stop our discussion and negotiation process with the Chinese. We should always constantly remain engaged so that we can talk about our differences and narrow those. I also feel that the Chinese need to be much more sensitive to India's concerns regarding the boundary question, and that will remain a very key priority and prerequisite for our development of economic ties. On the SCO front, there is another issue that I think will be very important, which is the question of anti-terrorism cooperation. As you know, SCO was a forum in which anti-terrorism was one of the original pillars on which it was founded. There are certain issues on which India and China can cooperate together, and China can take a much more positive approach towards the cross-border terrorism that India faces from Pakistan.
Right. So just as we talked about the Trump tariffs recently, um, like just as we are dealing with the US tariffs, we have seen that US has imposed secondary tariffs on India, since India is the second largest importer of Russian oil. But while China being the largest importer, US has still not imposed any kind of secondary tariffs. How do you assess this situation? And especially when amidst all this, we have seen that India and China are growing closer to each other.
I think India and China have always been close partners, just as India and the United States are very close partners. These relations are not based on a certain denial to the third party. Our relations with China are independent of the United States, just as our relations with the United States are independent of our relations with China. And while there are many commentators who wish to draw these links, I do not subscribe to them, because India, as an emerging major power, has a certain strategic autonomy on the basis of which it determines its policy approach, and it does not believe in playing one off against the other. And these things do not work when you really work with major power relations. I think on the question of tariffs, there is a mistake that the Trump administration has done. Tariffs is never a good way to go ahead, but that's the kind of approach they have adopted. Prime Minister Modi was one of the first to visit the White House and to look at the possibility of a trade negotiation towards a free trade agreement between the two sides. Those discussions were ongoing, and we had tentative understanding on a broad framework. I hope that those negotiations will resume, and this issue of retaliatory or subsidiary tariffs will be discussed at those and will be addressed appropriately.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your valuable time. I'm sure your insights would give our audience a lot of clarity in terms of these recent developments in India-China relations and its larger geopolitical consequences. Thank you for joining in, sir.
Thank you.